Hello again. Let me introduce my next lecture. Today we are going to discuss so-called scientific revolution. It's something that happened in the world, or to be specific, in Central and Western Europe at the late of the 1500s and primarily in the 1600s. Okay, but in order to discuss this, I need to again draw connections between what we did before and what we are going to do today. Why is it important? Again, in order to put this topic of scientific revolution in the context, okay, and to answer the question why it became so important. Okay, just as an introduction, let me stress that the scientific revolution, a phenomenon that phenomenon that happened in the life of Western and Central Europe, and primarily in the 1600s. It was an intellectual change of mindset of the people of Europe, okay, which opened again more doors to the modern society. Remember, the goal of our course, the primary goal of our course, is to show how our world became modern, okay. So this so-called scientific revolution was one of the elements of one of these historical events that opened the doors to the modern world, which created the modern world. Okay, but let me first show you this map. Okay, if you briefly look at this map, you will see that in Europe it mentions, you cannot see it well, but again, trust me, and these black dots, it's printing presses. Remember, in 1456, in the German town of Mainz, artisan named Johann Gutenberg invented printing, okay, which also opened the doors to the modern society, made our world modern. But here on this map, these black dots, you see that soon this invention picked up, and all over Europe we have a bunch of printing presses. Okay. I also wanted to draw attention to what I once mentioned briefly when we discussed Reformation, the Great Schism. Remember, in the world of religion, before the Reformation, there was Great Schism when Christians argued with each other who is going to become the Roman Pope. Remember? At some point, there were 2 Roman popes and 3 Roman popes, even 4 Roman popes at some point, because there was a fight, a struggle between local lords and the Roman Pope about who would make appointments in local areas, bishops, abbots, or priests, and the local lords wanted to do these appointments on their own. But the Roman popes didn't want to allow this. They said, we're going to appoint these people. So there was a tug of war between these two sides. And eventually the compromises were struck, but more, they had fights. And the fights over who would call the shots, okay, which opened the doors to the interesting, peculiar tradition, the Western tradition of the separation of church and state, which other civilizations didn't know, were not familiar with. Okay, it was only in Western culture, Western civilization. And as I said, at one point there were groups of European lords, kings, who promoted particular popes, and these popes were attacking each other, and which confused a lot of Christians. Remember. And eventually it created this favorable environment for so-called Reformation. You know everything about Reformation right now, right? It's a split between 2 groups of Christians in Europe. The split into Protestants, who peddled the Bible, peddled the reading of the Bible. Right? Bible was the center of everything for so-called Protestants. Again, Protestants didn't have anybody above them. They were decentralized people. They were against the Roman Pope. They didn't want to be controlled by one. Okay, they said every man is a minister, and some of them said every woman is a minister, and some of them said even children could be the ministers because they could read the Bible. Bible for Protestants was everything. In the Catholic Church, it was the Roman Pope, and coming to church, listening to this church singing, that was most important, okay? Again, you will understand why I'm mentioning all this. I simply want to highlight what we mentioned. Again, Gutenberg, printing. People became more educated than Europe, more educated. See, that's the whole thing. We have Reformation. Before the Reformation, we have printing. People of Europe, especially Northern Europe, became more educated. In some areas, totally educated. Remember, I told you this fact that 95% of Puritans who came here to North America, 95% of them were educated people. Men, women, and children who knew how to read and to write, which was unimaginable for other parts of the world. Unimaginable, I repeat, for other parts of the world. Bible was printed. Remember, a Bible was printed like crazy. Protestants printed the Bible because reading the Bible was the word of God, and that's what Martin Luther, John Calvin, and other Protestant leaders promoted. They said, read the Bible, that's the word of God. Okay, don't listen to the Roman Pope. So the Bible is the major authority. As I said, by doing this, people became educated, right? Because you need to know how to read and write if you want to make notes. But talking about notes, here on this picture, you can see so-called Geneva Bible. Geneva Bible, published by followers of John Calvin in Geneva. It's an English edition. It has a bunch of endnotes or side notes, explanations, interpretations of particular passages from the Bible, instructions on how to elect your leaders in local communities, religious communities, of course. So, a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, and a lot of critical thinking. So we have a bunch of Protestants, a bunch of these groups that begin to read the Bible and they interpret the Bible. And when you read something, you have your own mindset. And you begin to interpret things in your own individual way. And you begin to argue with some other groups by telling them, oh, I understand this passage this way. And another group tells you, oh, no, Jesus, when he said this, he meant that and that, and you argue with each other. And there were also some people who said, oh, hell with you, we go beyond the Bible. Yes, it's okay to read the Bible, but we'll find the truth somewhere else. We're going to experiment with other things, with occult knowledge, with magic, with astrology, okay? On top of this, there were geographical discoveries, remember how important it was? So the world was not an isolated anymore. The world was connected. So Europeans who sailed east and west discovered new lands, new civilizations. There were fights, there was trade, everything. Columbian exchange, remember, between the world, new world and the old world. See, before the geographical discoveries, people had these bizarre notions about distant lands. They thought some people had tails, or some people had the nose on their chest, as you can see here, or some had wolves' heads, and so bizarre notions. Now they realized that all of us, we're humankind, we're the same. So it opened the doors to what? To critical thinking. People started to compare their own civilizations with other civilizations, okay? So it, especially in Europe, it triggered the curiosity about the rest of the world. Curiosity, okay? And now what I'm going to bring to your attention is to tell you about the origin of so-called science. In fact, at that time, in 1500s and 1600s and 1700s as well, what people called science was related to all knowledge. All knowledge was called science. Okay. The science gradually grew out of religion. It wasn't something that suddenly was invented, okay, during 1600s, which was totally in contradiction to the religious viewpoint. No. Science was originally part of religion. It was only later, and not completely, It started to disentangle itself from religion, okay? But science emerged in Europe as a result of what? Reformation, in the wake of Reformation. Because people were fighting each other over religion. Some people became skeptical about the Roman popes. Not only about Roman popes, but skeptical about religion. If they were not skeptical, if they still went to church, if they were still religious, they still they wanted to go beyond the Roman Pope. Some of them wanted to go beyond the Bible, okay, to find the truth somewhere else in some kind of spiritual pursuits. And what we call science at that time was one of those spiritual pursuits people wanted to do in order to find the answers to what? To world's problems, to the construction of the world, to the origin of the world. And again, don't get me wrong. So people believed that the God had created the world. But again, they wanted to understand how and why. And see, they start to ask questions which they had not asked before the Reformation. So now they have too many questions. And I said, they were educated, they were reading, and they didn't trust anything. They had individual interpretation of the Bible. Some people became frustrated about existing churches, not only Catholic Church, but also Protestant Church. They wanted to find truth somewhere else, as I said, astrology, alchemy, Kabbalah, Tarot. And again, the point was to learn about the world that had been created by God. And that's how people concluded at that time. They were convinced that God had created the world. He was like a clock master. He had created the world, and now it's up to us to learn about this world, to perfect this world, to make it usable to other people, okay? And as I said, we have a huge pool of educated people, especially in Northern Europe, who could do this tinkering with other things. They could do alchemy, astrology, Kabbalah, okay? Educated people, artisans primarily, who lived in towns, okay? I will show you this image that explains to you, okay? Astrology. Again, let me tell you something about astrology, and you will understand what I mean when I say that people wanted to find the answer to the world's miracles, to the construction of the world, by going beyond the church, or by going beyond even conventional Christianity. Okay, look at this image. You see a man in a robe, obviously some kind of astrologer or scientist, we would say today, who stretches out, he stretches out his hand outside of the earthly realm, okay, outside of our earthly environment, trying to reach out to the stars, to the heaven, to the world of God. And that is why some of these astrologers, they manufacture telescopes and try to look at through the telescope to learn about God. Looking at the stars, looking at the moon, other planets, they thought they were learning about the world of God, learning about the God. Maybe they could find the answers how our world had been built. You know, what is the origin of this world? What was the first Big Bang, okay, that had started the whole world, okay? Again, look at this man. He was reaching out to the stars, to the heavenly spheres. See, before it was unimaginable because people believed that whatever was going on the earth, it was chaotic. Here we have the struggle between divine forces of Satan, okay, and we try to defend the divine world against the forces of Satan, so our world is chaos. But beyond our world, in the heavenly sphere, the world of the moon, the world of stars, it's a heavenly world. Everything there was perfect. Everything was definitive. Okay, it was God's domain in cosmos, in open space. Okay, it's perfect. It's the world of God. But let's learn about this world of God. So let's look through the telescope and find out about the world of God. Okay. See, that's how from astrology we have slowly what? Astronomy coming out, yeah? Slowly but slowly. Same thing, alchemists. There were some knowledgeable people who were tinkering with chemical elements in labs. They wanted to find so-called philosophical stone. At that time, there was a belief that you could find a philosophical stone that would open you will show you the source of complete knowledge. So you would find answers to all the miracles, to everything what is unknown in this world. You know, you have to discover this philosophical stone. So, and these people are called alchemists, and that's how chemistry gradually emerged. Okay. Formally, the origin of the scientific revolution is dated by the discovery that was made by Nicholas Copernicus, a Polish astronomer, and by the way, a die-hard Catholic, and I will tell you why it's so important for us here. Nicholas Copernicus, a mathematician, astronomer, astrologist simultaneously, who was asked by one of the Roman popes to fix the calendar, okay, because at that time there was a conviction that our universe was built this way. You know, the Earth was in the middle of the universe, and all planets, including the sun, everything was revolved around the Earth. So the Earth was in the middle, so-called geocentric view of the world. Of course, it's a mistaken view, but that's what they believed. And the Christian calendar that was tied to this mistaken view of the world had a lot of mistakes, and Christian noticed that through the number of years, the religious feasts, Christmas, Easter, and so forth, they were shifting. So something should be done. One of the Roman popes asked Nicholas Copernicus to fix this, and he started to play with the picture of the world, look at the stars, looked at the Earth, and then he assumed that if we put the sun in the middle of the universe, and if we assume that the Earth revolves and other planets revolves around the sun, which is what's going on, right? So everything would be fixed, the calendar would be fixed, and it would give us the correct view of the world, okay? So he made this discovery, and it's called the heliocentric view. So the Earth revolves around the sun, and he reported to the Roman Pope. But at the same time, he was so scared of this. Why? Because it contradicted the religious the view of the world at that time, which conventional religion held. Catholic religion believed, and many Protestants believed too, that the sun was revolving around the Earth. But the Copernicus argued the opposite. He said, no, guys, it was the sun that was in the center of the universe, and the Earth, along with other planets, was revolving around the sun. Okay, but he was a die-hard Catholic, as I said, and he actually said to the Roman Pope and his friends, let's not publish my discoveries, yeah? Because he was afraid that it might ruin the traditional view of the world, so-called Ptolemaic view of the world, okay, which held in a high esteem this geocentric view of the world. And by the way, his students still published his book, but he didn't give them permission to distribute it. And only on his deathbed, they brought him a copy of his book, and only after he died, they started to spread around his book, to distribute his book, okay? Because he was a Catholic, and he was afraid. He was afraid to do something, okay? By the way, soon his discovery was well known among educated people in different countries. Parts of the countries didn't exist at that time. Europe was only in the age of absolutism. We have new countries emerging. From different parts of Europe, intellectuals learning about this discovery, piece by piece, little by little. And one of the intellectuals was Tycho Brahe, who was a Dutch astronomer who became hooked on these ideas, okay? Tycho Brahe continued what Copernicus started. He also came to believe that the world should be viewed heliocentrically. Okay. He made one of the first telescopes, Tycho Brahe. He looked at the stars, he looked at the moon, and he actually discovered one of the new stars. And he said, hey guys, I discovered the new star. But the church, in this case, it was Protestant church, said, oh no, it's not correct, you cannot do it, because the world had been made once and for all over there, outside of the earth. Here on earth we have chaos, but outside it's a heavenly sphere, everything is perfect. So we simply didn't see this star. So it had existed before, you simply registered, and that's okay. It's called Cassiopeia, the new star. But Tycho Brahe wanted to say that stars actually they appear and then they die, and some of them appear again. So everything was changing even in the heavenly sphere, and that's what priests didn't like. This, oh no, you cannot say this. But he wasn't penalized for doing this, because he lived in a Protestant country where there were a lot of toleration, a bunch of different groups of Protestants, so there was no one church to penalize him. But that was not the case of another man named Galileo Galilei, who lived in a Catholic country of Italy. Okay, Galileo Galilei was not fortunate to live in Italy, where he was ostracized and penalized for his discoveries. He also discovered something that became important. It's a telescope. He built a very powerful telescope trying to look at the heavenly spheres, at the stars, and he started to argue from a viewpoint of Catholic Church, a sacrilegious thing. He started to argue that a moon, which he was able to see, so to speak, in a close range, by using powerful lenses. As I said, he built the most powerful telescope at that time. And he said, hey, the moon also made from stones like our earth, and it has valleys, it has mountains. And the Catholic Church said, no, you cannot talk like this. It's a heavenly sphere. Don't go there. You cannot tell people about this. So he was not only ostracized, he was brought to Rome, and he was put on trial. Here, by the way, you can see a picture. Galileo Galilei standing the trial of Catholic bishops, theologians, who condemned him, and he was actually condemned. He was forced to admit, even though for himself he didn't want to recognize this, but he had to face either death or to admit that the earth did not revolve around the sun. So he had to so he was forced to admit that the earth was in the middle of the universe and the sun was revolving around the earth. Okay, that was he was forced, and in exchange he was put under house arrest. His life was spared, but he didn't have a chance to teach. He was famous for publicizing ideas of Nicholas Copernicus, for his discoveries, what he saw through the telescope. So he was forbidden to teach, was put under house arrest, but at least his life was spared. Even though he admitted publicly that the sun was revolving about the earth. Supposedly, there is a legend. I don't know if it's true or not, but it had been said that when he was leaving the court, he said, "Still, it moves around the sun." So he made reference to the earth. Okay, so I guess he was forced to make a confession. Otherwise, he would have lost his life. Okay. But again, if we go to Protestant countries, we will see a totally different attitude to science, because there was, in Northern Europe, it was more room. There was more room for knowledge, for discoveries, and the people were not penalized for what they were saying about the stars, the moon, their heavenly spheres, right? Because people were more Protestants. I wouldn't say all of them, but Protestant countries were more open to knowledge because they were more skeptical, right? And one of these people who benefited from living in a Protestant country was Isaac Newton, whose name you might have known already. Eh? Isaac Newton, you heard about him if you took in high school courses in physics, algebra, and so forth. He was famous for discovery of the law of gravity. Right? He wrote a book called Principia Mathematica. Okay, he viewed our world as a big machine where everything, all parts were connected. Okay, so he was looking for the explanation how our world was organized. Okay, and he said everything in our world was connected. Okay, connected by gravity. By the way, Isaac Newton was a very spiritual man. Again, I'm trying to tell you that science emerged from religion. He was a very spiritual man, and he actually argued that whatever I'm trying to do, I'm trying to unlock the miracles God had planted for us on this earth. So we need to find more about the world of God by exploring the world around us and perfecting our life. See, we unlock the miracles or natural laws, like later scientists started to call these miracles or whatever secrets God had planted for us. They started to call them natural laws. So we're going to use these natural laws, what God had planted for us, to perfect the life of the people. Okay. And by the way, this conviction that God had created the world as a clock master, but now it's up to us to investigate, to explore this world. Okay. God, once he had created the world, he doesn't interfere anymore in our life. So this type of view became known as deism. Deism, it's from a Latin expression double, double. Okay, so people, the most educated people, who believed that God had created the world, but he does not interfere in our daily life. He simply had created the world, and now it's up to us to explore the world. Again, they were called deists. And again, why do I tell you this? It shows you that these so-called scientists, they were still people of religion. They were grounded very much in the spiritual world. Okay, so they didn't separate. We cannot say that, oh, they didn't believe in God or something like this. Like sometimes you in textbooks you read such statements that, hey, there was a world of religion in Middle Ages, then something happened, and nearly overnight we have a change of mind, and we have science, secular science, popping up. It didn't happen this way. It was growing slowly out of religion, and plus people who were scientists and who are scientists to the present day, some of them, not all of them, they are people of religion. Okay. So a lot of scientists, they're religious. They were and still are religious people. Yeah, so we cannot assume that all of them secular people. Okay. What I'm trying to tell you is that unlike the common folk at that time, who believed that God constantly interfered in daily life. For instance, if my cow died, it might be God penalizing me for some of my evil deeds. Or if I find, let's say, a coin, some thaler, like a German coin, on the ground, and it's a nice golden coin, I might say, oh, God is watching for me because I found this coin, it's good. So it means I'm doing something good. God is watching for me. So people like Newton, Galileo Galilei, they didn't think this way. They were deists, okay? They believed in God, but they only believed that God had created the world. They didn't ascribe everything, whatever happens in our daily life, to interference of God. Another name, there will be a lot of names today, okay, so be ready for this. Another important name we need to remember, Francis Bacon, who lived in, by the way, in 1500s, okay? In 1500s. But his influence became profound in the 1600s. That is why I'm talking about him. Francis Bacon is considered the father of inductive reasoning. So he said, you need to observe the environment, okay? And you have to see if certain patterns repeat, and you can stage experiments. And if you see if results of your experiments are confirmed again, and again, it means through experiment you can discover a natural law which you could use to perfect life of the people. Okay. By the way, Francis Bacon was the one who kind of threw the slogan. He said, "Conquer the nature," because at that time it was very kind of progressive, good, because people were. Some intellectuals believed at that time that people were still prisoners of nature, and God gave human beings natural laws. Why? Because people need to uncover these natural laws and to use them to perfect life, the life of the people, their own life. Okay. So we need to conquer the nature that had been given to us by Mr. God. Okay. Sorry for my remark. Anyway, but that's how it was. I'm simplifying the whole thing, and it's maybe in a crude language, but that's how it was. Conquer the nature meant we need to conquer, we need to discover a bunch of natural laws, we need to subject nature to the human control. From our present viewpoint, of course, it sounds horrible because right now we're so environmentally minded, we just go to another extreme, right? We want to protect nature, which is fine, but we so much want to protect nature that we some of us say, oh, human beings are so evil, wicked, we would rather get rid of them because Mother Nature is so good, we need to protect her. Okay, it's another extreme. But generally speaking, at that time people still did need to conquer the nature because they were prisoners of natural forces. But I guess in modern time, especially in the last century and in the beginning of the 21st century, people conquered nature so much that sometimes Mother Nature turned against people. Okay, because people embraced science, embraced this tinkering with nature so much that nature kind of penalizes them. Okay. But at that time, they were not there yet. It was later, when throughout the centuries, when people finally conquered the nature, they realized how dangerous it could be conquering the nature. Okay, there's another opposite side, like nuclear weapons, there's ecological disasters. But at that time, there was no such things around, right? So digging coal, cutting woods, blocking rivers, okay, to harness the energy of the water was good thing. Okay, so they believe they need to conquer the nature because God had given it to us. So do experiments, watch if you notice repetitive patterns, and use these patterns to benefit the life of the people. But another man, Rene Descartes, Frenchman, came up with logical reasoning. He said, not necessarily you can come from the bottom, you can go from the top. You can assume certain things. You can make a hypothesis, assumption about something, but then you go on the ground and check if your assumption is right or wrong, okay? To prove right or wrong your assumption, hypothesis. So Bacon said you can go from bottom up by observing the nature, noting some kind of patterns, using these patterns. But Rene Descartes said you can go from up to bottom, some logical reasoning, and then checking watching the nature, like doing experiment to prove if your assumption was right or wrong. Okay. So the major message of the scientific revolution, I repeat, mostly scientific revolution, it was a revolution in the minds of the people that was taking place in the 1600s. People who were active in the scientific revolution, they were coming to this conclusion that our nature around us should have natural laws that had been granted by God, okay, natural laws. And we need to learn, we don't know all of them. Like, for instance, the law of gravity that had been discovered by Newton. But we're sure there are many other laws around us. So let's discover these laws. Let's discover these laws. Okay. So there was this conviction that nature has natural laws and we need to use them. But that's the most important thing. If our nature has laws, it means our society, which is part of nature, should also have laws. Okay? It means if Mother Nature had some laws, like law of gravity, or I don't know, you name them, those of you who are good in physics. But it means in political life and social life, economic life, we also should have some natural laws. We also should look for patterns, and we should use these laws to benefit life of the people. Okay? And that's how gradually scientific revolution started giving rise to what? To the Enlightenment. Enlightenment. Again, I will start today this topic of enlightenment, telling you about enlightenment, and then we'll continue next time. Okay, but today about enlightenment. It's something that deeply connected with the scientific revolution. In fact, many scientists who were active, like Isaac Newton in the scientific revolution, they also promoted so-called enlightenment. Why enlightenment? Enlightenment, it means we need to enlighten people. First of all, educated people, people who lived in towns. It was towns that was the major hub of the Enlightenment movement. Okay, so the major message of the Enlightenment was, let's enlighten people about natural laws in nature and in society. Okay, natural laws. Let's make them aware about how our social life, economic life, political life should be organized. Let's make our world perfect based on these natural laws, okay? Those people who wanted to promote education, it's about education, educating people about mathematics, physics, history, economics. That's what they wanted, these people of enlightenment. They call themselves philosophers. It means intellectuals, thinkers. Okay, it's a French word, philosophers, men and women, scientists and writers who promoted enlightenment. Again, enlightenment, that's what it says. It's about enlightening people, educating them about different types of knowledge, about economics, about politics, about physics, mathematics. Okay, of course, England had a lot of these enlightened people, and they were supported by the government. Okay, at the same time, France was also a hub of this enlightenment. Paris was the center. Okay, Enlightenment people and scientists too, who were active in scientific revolution, they were meeting in clubs, coffee houses. Okay, coffee houses. Interesting phenomenon that came from the Middle East. Okay, after we take our first test, I will tell you more about the origin of coffee houses. So anyway, these philosophers, these intellectuals who promoted the scientific revolution and who promoted enlightenment, trying to use natural laws to improve the life of society. Okay, economic, political, social life of society. By the way, both scientific revolution and enlightenment were tightly connected to what later became known as the American Revolution 1776 and the French Revolution 1789. What's the connection? The connection was direct, because people who triggered and spearheaded the American Revolution, the French Revolution, they were middle-class people who were highly educated people, okay, who were concerned about knowledge, who wanted to spread knowledge about natural life, about society among the other people, okay, who wanted to look for these natural laws and who wanted to change the life of society, okay, according to what they called natural laws. And of course, jumping ahead, the so-called founding fathers, whose name you heard hundreds of times: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and especially Benjamin Franklin. These were people of enlightenment. In fact, Benjamin Franklin gives us an example, a person who was standing with his feet in both. He was a person who was promoting the scientific revolution. Because he was famous for his scientific experiments. It all became like a proverbial example how he was doing science, performing his experiments. At the same time, Benjamin Franklin was one of the founding fathers who signed this Declaration of Independence, right? So he was active in enlightenment, enlightening people about society and how society should be organized and how society should be changed. Okay, see, interesting example. Okay, Ben Franklin. Oh, by the way, Thomas Jefferson, to some extent, also can, like Franklin, he could be called a person of enlightenment and a person of scientific revolution. In fact, Thomas Jefferson could be called the best example of American enlightenment. Why? Because he wrote the Declaration of Independence, okay, which, remember, it said that all men are created equal. It's a natural law. See, the claim was that, oh, we know about this natural law, that all men were created equal, and hence they need this natural rights, and nobody is allowed to violate the natural rights. See, the Declaration of Independence, it was the product of this scientific revolution and enlightenment. And Thomas Jefferson was the best example of American enlightenment, the person who wrote the Declaration of Independence. At the same time, Jefferson was also active in, he was doing science. He wrote a book called Notes on Virginia that contains a lot of anthropological observations, botanical observations, okay, economic observations. So he was a scientist to some extent. Although, I repeat, he became more famous as the person of enlightenment, because he was enlightening society, and he later became a president. So the best example of American enlightenment, Thomas Jefferson. The key words of enlightenment, again, don't separate enlightenment and scientific revolution. So enlightenment, it's something that gradually grew out of the scientific revolution. I repeat, do not separate enlightenment from the scientific revolution. Enlightenment, it is something that gradually grew out of the scientific revolution and expanded when? Enlightenment. In the 1700s. The key words of enlightenment: reason, science, progress. Education, people should be more educated. Personal freedom, liberty. Say something or anything that doesn't harm anybody. Okay? And allow everybody to speak up his or her ideas. Don't squash anybody. Don't infringe on the freedom of speech. Okay, so all these things, everybody should have a right to express his or her own opinion. Okay, it's something that originated with enlightenment. And I repeat, these ideas were the most widespread among the people who lived in cities. So city folks, middle class city folks, artisans, okay, some teachers, lawyers, scribes, okay. So people who lived in towns and cities. People of enlightenment argued that we discovered natural laws. We know them. Some of them claim, okay, we discovered natural laws. For instance, what happened in England? Some Enlightenment people, writers and intellectuals, they watched England, what happened in England. Remember last time we said that by chance English people came up with this practice of checks and balances, where royal power executive was balanced by judicial power, and especially was balanced by the power of the parliament. So we have three branches of power. So some of the Enlightenment people watched this and said, hey, this is a natural law, that's good. We're going to use this constitutional limitations on their royal power, okay? Or freedom of speech, press, okay? It's a natural right to all people to speak up. So why should I stay silent and you can speak? You think you have a right to speak. Why should you deny me a right to speak? Why is it your opinion and not mine? So are we going to kill each other, or you want to prevail, or you want me to prevail? But why don't we allow each other to speak up? Okay, so that's freedom of speech, because we're endowed with natural rights. You cannot tell me that I'm an evil person. Okay, you cannot tell me that I have no right to speak up, because from your viewpoint, I'm an evil guy, because I can tell the same thing about you. I can tell you that you're evil guy, but I'm good one. There's embodiment of goodness. So in this, are we going to squash each other, or we'll rather allow each other to speak up? Okay. And remember, on the Middle Ages and before the English Revolution, especially, there was no equality of law. I'm not talking about common folks. Even for aristocrats and rich townspeople, it was only the king who decided everything. But for the first time in Britain, 1688, there was Glorious Revolution, which gave rise to at least 4% of the population. So rich aristocrats and rich townspeople who were considered, from our present viewpoint, could be considered citizens, who could elect, who could testify in courts, and the government could not arbitrarily confiscate the properties. Okay, so they had rights. I repeat, it's a small, tiny number of the population, but still it was something good, which people in other lands and civilizations didn't have. Okay, it's very important. So we're equal in the eyes of law. Why should you confiscate my property? Because you're a government? Or why do we need different sets of laws? Like for one class, for peasants, for nobles, for church people. That's eventually what some people, not that during the Glorious Revolution, but later, in the wake of the American Revolution, French Revolution especially, said, why should we need to have different sets of laws for clergy, for aristocracy, or for middle class, for peasants? So everything should be done in the same courts. So all people, all classes should be tried in the same courts. By the trial of jury. Okay, no aristocratic privileges, because God created us. See, it's comes from Christian religion. God created us the same. So we are the same in the eyes of God. So we endowed with natural rights. So why should we be separated into church people, aristocrats, and peasants? It's against God's law. See, that's a very interesting thing. I'm jumping ahead here a little bit. So that is why American Declaration of Independence and Constitution became so important. Okay, not because they gave rights because they didn't give rights to certain groups of people, but these Declaration of Independence and Constitution, these became very important historically because they opened the doors. For people to win more freedoms. Okay, to gain more liberty, because of this whole notion of natural laws. Originally, this concept of natural laws was extended only to a tiny group of people, like in England, 4% of population. In the United States, like 20% of population. Okay, in France, more. And see, that is why, and I'm going to talk next time about this, but I just want to emphasize this to make sure that you understand the historical significance of such things like Declaration of Independence, U.S. Constitution, which were the products of the Enlightenment. Okay, they, from our present viewpoint, they were not perfect, but they were very perfect from historically speaking, because they opened the doors. English Bill of Rights, which was imperfect compared to American Bill of Rights, because it didn't give so many rights as the American Bill of Rights, which was adopted late, or American Declaration of Independence Constitution, were more open, more progressive than English Bill of Rights, 1688. Okay, But we are talking about this historical movement, okay? So gradual march of liberty. So more and more people were, I'm using bookish word, enfranchised, so becoming citizens, having more rights, and eventually more and more groups were involved, okay? And it's a natural law. Everything went back to this concept of natural laws, okay? See, that's the power of Enlightenment, the power of these documents, I repeat, Declaration of Independence, because they opened this kind of gate, they opened the door for people to win more liberty, okay? We cannot demand from people who live like 200-300 years ago that we cannot demand from them to behave the way we behave right now in the 21st century, because the past is like a foreign country. It was totally different time. People had totally different mindset. I again want to emphasize that what we are talking about right now, Enlightenment, glorious revolution, it did not exist in other parts of the world. You know, in other parts of the world, human life didn't cost anything, including aristocrats and church people. Everybody could execute at any time, no rights, like Russian Empire, Ottoman Empire. Okay, it was only something was going on by chance in this part of the world, in Northern Europe primarily, that gave people freedoms which other cultures and civilizations could use later, could capitalize and build on. Okay, that's what I'm trying to explain to you, the profound significance of Enlightenment. Okay. Again, Isaac Newton also was like Ben Franklin, standing with 2 feet, with 1 foot in the world of scientific revolution. He also said we should improve the human society. Okay, we should educate people about laws in society. So he contributed a lot to the Enlightenment. When I say laws of society, again, let me give you examples. Like some people said, what's the ideal law in society? So we have all natural rights, okay, we're equal. But people had different visions, okay? There was actually a fight among people, what should be considered the natural law. Like there was a man, a philosopher named Thomas Hobbs, who argued 1600s that, look, the government originated from a conflict. Yes, we all have natural rights, but we're like animals, human beings. If we don't have like a middleman above us, okay, to act as like a judge, an umpire, a mediator, we will devour, we will destroy each other, okay? So we will delegate some of our natural rights to this middleman, a middle woman, king or queen, who sits above us, okay? So we delegate part of our rights, and that's how we should be dominated. So Thomas Hobbes said that's the origin of the royal power. So that's how we have kings and queens, because we had delegated them to act as middlemen, okay? And he actually used the Reformation and the fight of Europeans against each other, Catholics against Protestants, Protestants against Catholics, as an example that, look, when we're in conflict, when we don't have anybody above us, so we're killing each other. See, he used the religious war as an example. So people, animals by nature, they fight over everything, so they need some kind of restraintment. They need the middleman who will mediate, who will pacify them, and that's the origin of the government, okay? But John Locke, another guy who was active in the 1600s, a very important man, a very important intellectual, English intellectual, John Locke, argued opposite. He said, no, that's not the natural law. So you are wrong, Thomas Hobbes, you're wrong. The natural law is not how you view it. Natural law, it's people from down below, they elect and dispose their kings and queens. That's how they should do, anytime. So we shouldn't just grant them power, and the kings and queens should inherit this power. That's what Thomas Hobbes said. It's okay, you know, because we need some kind of a middleman on top of us, you know, and that's why kings and queens inherit the power. They always should be above us. John Locke said, no, kings and queens are simply managers. They can be good managers, they can be bad managers. And if we don't like them, we should dismiss them. And he used the English Revolution, which beheaded the king. Remember, English Parliament beheaded the king in 1641. Remember? Charles II, last time we talked about, he was beheaded by the English Parliament. He said, look, he was a bad manager. He didn't satisfy the people, and the Parliament beheaded him. That's a natural law. So all power comes from the people. See, that was he argued, natural law. Power comes from the people. And the king, if kings do not do their job, they should be kicked out. So, see, he even made this argument in favor of what? Of revolution. And he was, by the way, John Locke was the first to say this phrase, which became known. Everybody, I'm sure, heard this phrase that all men are created equal, which was included into the Declaration of Independence. This phrase, but it was John Locke's phrase. Okay, and he also said that a good government, it's the government that protects private property of the people. Okay, and it's private property. It's also a natural law. God grants us private property. There was another man, a very important philosopher, whose name is Adam Smith. Adam Smith. He was a professor of moral philosophy in a Scottish town of Edinburgh. But this man, Adam Smith, became more famous for the natural law of supply and demand. And that's how he became famous. Okay. He wrote a very powerful book, which is still in print to the present day. I'm not sure if bookstores are opened or not, but if you go to a bookstore, you will see it's still in print and paperback. It is called The Wealth of Nations. By the way, please know that it was published in 1776. Remember what happened in 1776? Don't forget about it. I guess things come together. Okay. Anyway, Adam Smith argued that he claimed that he discovered the economics, the law of economics, how economic life should function. And he said, for a good economy to function, it should follow the law of supply and demand. So if you have a demand, so business supplies the product and people buy it. Okay, if there's no demand, this business goes bankrupt or declines, and a new business goes into business to satisfy another demand, so that's how it works. And Adam Smith said that the good government, see, according to natural law, the good government should follow laissez-faire. See, it's a French phrase, laissez-faire, hands-off approach in economic life. It should be not the king, not the queen. It should be the government of the people, which doesn't interfere in economic life. It allows business and people to do their own things. Free market. So when government interferes with free market, it suffocates economic life. It makes it worse. It stagnates economic life. Okay, it retards economic life if government interferes in economy. Okay. So let's follow the simple principle, which he labeled by the French word laissez-faire, hands off. That should be our approach in economic life. So Adam Smith is considered a father of free enterprise. Okay. And his book, The Wealth of Nations, is considered the gospel of free trade, free market. So let's have free market. And the government should not interfere in the free market. Okay, that's the law of the land. That's what natural law should be. And we destroyed or ruined our life. Many governments shot themselves in the foot by interfering into the life of business, into economic life. So people should be free. Adam Smith argued people should be free to do what? To be hired, to be fired. People should be free to start their own business. People should be free to go broke. Okay, no wonder that this guy was a die-hard enemy of slavery. He actually used the example of North America, and he said, look how bad it is. South, American South, compared to northern part. It's underdeveloped because it was based on slave economy, and nobody is going to work for free. So why don't you free people and let them be free laborers? Free laborers, free labor. Okay? And in fact, Adam Smith should be credited with promoting the first laws against slavery. It didn't happen right away. Okay, he and his friends were doing a massive campaign. Some religious people from Methodist Church in England, I'm not going to mention the names because we have enough names. Anyway, Methodist Church in England and plus Adam Smith, they were petitioning the parliament. They did mass campaigns, and eventually in the beginning, next century, in the beginning of the 1800s, to be specific, in 1807, in Britain became the first country that outlawed the slave trade. And then slavery was outlawed as well in 1830. And the huge contribution into this cause of abolition was made by Adam Smith, because again, he was a staunch defender of free market who spoke against slavery. But on the other hand, it's interesting, he was a die-hard opponent of welfare. He said, you cannot promote welfare. That's how you spoil people. Okay, so you create these bad incentives by expanding welfare. You spoil them, and people are not going to work. See, that's what he argued. That's also natural law. He said, if you distribute money and you don't require people to work for this money, and if you just give them money, it's you will never force them to work. Okay, see, on the one hand, he was against slavery, but on the other hand, against the welfare state. But it's logically consistent, right? If you look into this, it's logically consistent, right? There was another man named Montesquieu, French philosopher, also active person during the days of Enlightenment. He also is credited with the discovery of this natural law. And I mentioned this before. Natural law, checks and balances. He said, look at the England. Remember I mentioned that people of Enlightenment, people of scientific revolution, they looked at England and said, hey, how good they are. Because by chance they discovered something that is looks like natural law. That's how good government should be organized. Checks and balances, executive, judicial, and legislative powers should balance each other. Okay, so England as a role model. Look at the England. Look at the country of England. It discovered for us something which we can call natural law, and to make sure that government becomes a good government, you need to follow this principle: checks and balances. You need to balance power among these three branches of power. That's how you're going to have a good government. And in fact, that's what so-called founding fathers did in the United States when they did what? When they, following English experience, perfected, improved the system. They created what? Congress. They created institution of president, executive, okay, Congress, legislative, and they created Supreme Court and other courts, federal and state courts, which created the third branch of power, judicial. And neither of them should be supreme. So that's the message. Montesquieu said England actually showed to us that royal power is limited, but at the same time the power of the parliament is limited and judicial power is limited. So they kind of dance around each other, they bite each other, they criticize each other, they attack each other, but they balance each other. And eventually who benefits? Us, people benefit. We shouldn't make supreme, so neither of them should be supreme. That's how the system works, okay? Neither of these branches of power should be supreme. All of them should be equally balanced, okay? It's very important. And final, again, enough names, final, last name. François-Marie Arouet Voltaire, or Voltaire, in the French writer, intellectual, very famous, critic of religion. He criticized religion. That's what he was famous for. You know, he didn't like religion. He wasn't exactly an atheist, but he didn't like what mainstream conventional church. He didn't like the church, didn't like the established church, Catholic Church, especially in France. Okay. Criticized church, but at the same time he was famous, I would like to make a note, for promoting freedom of speech and freedom of press. Very important. Freedom of speech and freedom of press. And he liked to attack aristocrats who believed they shouldn't be criticized because they were noble. They were supreme. Nobody should criticize them. But he was famous for picking up certain famous names of nobles and criticizing them because some of them were corrupt. In fact, with one of them, he almost had a duel. So he, at some point, one aristocrat tried to kill him. So he had to escape to England. He lived for a while in England. Okay. So anyway, Voltaire said that yes, checks and balances is important, but that's not enough. In order for a good government in the country to function really good, you need to have freedom of speech. You cannot shut down freedom of speech. You know, you shouldn't. Again, of course, he would have been very much surprised, Voltaire, if he heard such expression as hate speech. You know, he would have laughed at this. Of course, he said all speech should be free. And look. He said this famous phrase, "I hate your views, but I will die for your right to express them. I hate your views, but I will die for your right to express them." It became a very powerful phrase, which later other people repeated. That sometimes ascribed to the other people, like Thomas Paine once said this phrase. Again, American founding fathers repeated this phrase. But think about it. How many of you, ask yourself, can I do this? Or I cannot do this. How many of you can say this powerful phrase? But it's a very powerful, it's a very meaningful phrase. I hate your views, but I will die for your right to express them. Anyway, I'm finishing, and remember, enlightenment, it's about enlightening people. So about spreading the knowledge in society. Knowledge about what? Mother Nature, natural laws in nature, about natural laws of society, economic laws, economic life of people, social life, political life, there's checks and balances, everything. Again, I'm giving you just a few examples, but it's about knowledge. So these people of enlightenment, they wanted to enlighten society. About knowledge to make people more educated. Okay, how do we make people more educated? How do we make people aware of these natural laws and knowledge in general? We need to give them some kind of user-friendly description of scientific accomplishments, of accomplishments of economists, historians. Okay, how do we do it? We need to write brief entries to summarize these sophisticated discoveries scientists did, which was hard to understand regular folk. And that's how this idea of encyclopedia came about. Denis Diderot, whose name I mentioned before, 1719, came up with the project of encyclopedia. The first encyclopedia was published in 1719. Okay. And sold 15,000 copies, which was a lot at that time. It was almost, from a viewpoint of that time, it was a bestseller. Okay. Encyclopedia, it was the way to collect knowledge and summarize the knowledge in small entries. So a bunch of these entries were put together. Denis Diderot solicited many educated people of Europe, asking them to summarize the different discoveries, and then he edited them and simplified them to make sure that even people with elementary education would understand them. See, that was the point, to make encyclopedia to make knowledge available to a wide circle of people with elementary education. Okay, that's how it looked, by the way, this first encyclopedia. I forgot how many volumes. I think, as far as I remember, 17 volumes this encyclopedia had. Okay, and that will be it about scientific revolution and enlightenment. So these two powerful movements that gradually grew out of what we had discussed before: Reformation and Renaissance, geographical discoveries. Okay, and on this note, I would like to finish today's lecture. Thank you for your attention. I'll see you on the next time.